I'm Anna Parma. I'm a researcher from Argentina. I work for the National Research Council of Argentina in a research lab that is in the coast of Patagonia, and I do all kinds of research involving marine fisheries. I was always part from the very beginning when we had a working group that put together the first database, what we call RAM Legacy database, and that was focused mainly on fisheries that are assessed all over the world, as many as we could get a hold of, because we saw that as an opportunity to really ground some of the statements that we were making about status of world fisheries on solid ground, basically on actual data. But the frustration for me was that I have, although I come from a assessment background, that's what my training was. When I moved to Latin America from Seattle, I was trained here in Seattle. I became way more involved with small-scale coastal fisheries. So there was a bit of a frustration that we could only tell the story of these industrial fisheries based on scientific data. So this now finally is the point where we're really recognizing that the challenges and the opportunities for learning and for improving the sustainability of fisheries are in the developing world. Also in the developed world, but mostly in the small-scale coastal fisheries, for which the diversity of challenges and problems that these fisheries pose are way larger than what you get in the industrial fisheries. For all the diversity that you see in industrial fisheries, when it comes to it, they're all very similar. We use similar types of assessment methods, we use similar types of management. There may be very different ways in which the information is used for decision making, but there is a lot of commonalities. But when you open the door to small-scale fisheries, then the diversity is enormous, from the institutional side, from the ecological side, from the operation of the fisheries themselves, and that brings all kinds of challenges. So there's clearly a need to collect the information that is available in different places in a more systematic way, so that we can tell stories that are useful for everybody to understand that there's no single silver bullet that will solve the problems, that there is not just about tools, but it's about processes, and we need to be able to collect data on those too. So what kinds of institutions have been devised? And I think FIM provides that opportunity. We were seeing all these very bad, sad pictures of fisheries going really in the wrong direction, and we thought, well, there is all these NGOs and all these processes that are painting a picture that is probably worse than it is. That was our impression from the fisheries people, because we have seen some improvement in many of them, and we thought, well, the only way is to ground these statements on real data. That was the motivation to collect RAM. And sure enough, when we started, and this was after some major changes in some of the countries, where there were some legal mandates that were changing, like the Sustainable Fisheries Act in the United States, and then Europe went through similar processes where there was a strengthening of the legislation to actually try to be, to develop targets and to stay below above this limit reference points and on target for most of the fisheries. And what we saw is that these legal elements tended to work. So there was a lot of case studies where we saw some immediate decline in fishing pressure. What we're still waiting is for more of a, the recovery that we're just beginning to see now, and then whether that eventually will be turned into an increase in the catch, because after all, that's what we're predicating, that when all the rebuilding plans were put in place, at least in the States and in other countries, the promise was that fisheries would rebuild and eventually the catches would go up. So we still have to see that stage in the process. We saw the first impact on reducing the fishing pressure, which is all you can control. Then there is all kinds of climate and environmental variabilities that will affect the pace at which the biomass will respond. But some of them are starting to turn the tide and to see some improvement. And we're yet to see the increases in the catches that were promised. So that's good news, at least to show that the conventional fisheries management paradigm for this kind of fisheries that are mainly industrial, that can be assessed, whether it's an infrastructure, whether it's an institutional structure that can actually respond. There is a decision-making process that is transparent, that is based on science, and you can see that these elements of conventional fisheries management do work. And I think the RAM legacy was a big opportunity to actually show that based on actual concrete situations in the world. But the countries that have industrial fisheries in Latin America or South America, they vary a lot in terms of the institutional capability to conduct the assessments and the way the decision-making processes work. So probably Chile is one of the countries that is more advanced, and they have followed the model from the US, and now they have changed the Fisheries Act to make it a requirement to actually do TACs and to do total allowable catches that will be based on science, and to use reference points that are based on maximum sustainable yield. So it's probably the first country that we expect to see similar responses as we've seen in other places where we saw this turning the tide. Other countries are lagging behind. They're still, they do have some capability, they do have assessments, but the way the decisions are made is not that transparent, and there's no harvest control rules that are decided in advance so that you know how to set the TAC once the stock is in bad shape or things like that. So they are less formal in that way. They do conduct assessments, but they're still not doing the full evaluation of the harvesting strategies that will take them to a better situation when fisheries are overfished. Anchoveta is such a variable fishery that the most current assessment that we have, it is in good shape, but it's so driven by these environmental pulses and the El Niño events that is a very challenging fishery, that it may be in good or bad shape. This is something that is just part of the natural cycle. So it's hard to say, this is the kind of fisheries that can be good or bad depending on what the environmental conditions are, and this is the challenging for them to develop some harvesting control rules that are able to accommodate that kind of variability. We tend to think of them as being data poor. So there's been, like, people that come from an assessment background like myself will tend to emphasize that aspect. So it's the fact that you don't have data and you don't conduct assessments, so you don't have the science to inform the decision making. Then the people that come from a more social kind of background will see that there is a lot of opportunity to make decisions that are still transparent without an assessment. And so they are emphasizing the people-centered processes. And I think we need both. We need a little bit of science on the status of the fisheries so that we can do some kind of adaptive adjustment of the fishing pressure based on the status of the stock. And we need also to involve the people in all aspects of management, from data collection to identifying the tools that may work for the different context, identifying the best ways to reduce overcatching or to improve the enforcement capabilities. And usually that's very difficult to do from the top down, because these fisheries tend to be spread out. You don't have big landing ports that are the main thing. See, you have an industrial fishery, you need to land in big ports with a lot of infrastructure, and that has a lot of implications in terms of your capabilities to collect data, to account for the catches, and to enforce the regulations. When you don't have that, and you have landings that are spread all over the place in little tiny coves in the coast, then the central government cannot do it. So clearly you need to involve the people in all these aspects of management. And that's way more challenging, and we have to be prepared for things that are improving and deteriorating. So there is wins, and sometimes the wins don't last. So it's hard to define what a success story is, because sometimes it's a success for a short period and then things go bad, depending on leadership, depending on people aspects that are way more difficult to to it's basically not the tool, but it's the processes that are in place. So we tend to sometimes think of the tool that will make a solution. So we say, well, for these kinds of fisheries, something that giving the people the incentive, so providing access, exclusive access to a piece of fishing ground that may provide the incentives, and they get involved in the management and the collection of data. Well, yes, but then the details is what counts. How do you do it? Who gets the access? You know, is it at what level? What's the spatial scale? Is it the municipalities? Is it the actual coastal communities? What is it that, you know, and there is a diversity of solutions. So fisheries are very diverse, but the diversity of approaches that you may try to move the fish in the right direction are huge, and that's why the fin is interesting, because we can tell the story. I think there is a lot of stories to be told, and they need to be collected in a more systematized way so that people can learn from each other.